Welcome everybody to our next interview series with our endorsed candidates. We've got Dale Whitaker here with us, who is running for Secretary of State in our state of Washington. And of course, he's the Spokane GOP endorsed candidate, as well as the WSRP, Washington State Party endorsed candidate. So welcome, Dale. Thanks for being here today.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for having me.
You bet. So Dale, tell everybody about yourself, your background, and why you are running for this position.
Yeah, so I actually am British. I moved here in 2008 from England. I became a citizen in 2015. And I'm running for Secretary of State because I believe that election transparency is one of the most important issues on the ballot. I think that we see that there's a lot of folks out there who do not trust the electoral system. Even folks who are actively engaged in politics don't trust the system. And I believe that a lot of that is to do with transparency. I've been in accounting for 16 years and I've been in executive level positions for 10. So I'm going to lend my accounting experience to the Secretary of State's office and audit, ensure that our electoral process is clean and secure and transparent. I think one of the big things that we're missing in our electoral system from the ground up is people don't understand it. And when they try to understand it, they're kind of shoved to the side and they say, well, we can't show you that. You can't get this information. Instead of having really clear and transparent processes and the county auditors bringing people in, and some of them do, but bringing people in and saying, this is how my process works start to finish, and showing them through that entire process, I think would really help people to feel a lot better about showing up and voting.
Yeah.
I was in a Seattle Times editorial board meeting with Steve Hobbs, and he had said that when he took office, 35% of the electorate did not trust the election system in Washington State. And one of the things that he's doing, he's actually contracted with a foreign intelligence firm called Logically AI. And what they do is they go out to all the social medias, they go to even like the Seattle Times comment section. And if you mention election integrity or misinformation, disinformation, whatever, they take screenshots and they report back to Steve Hobbs. So my question to Steve, when he said about the 35% of the folks in Washington that didn't trust our elections, I asked him if he felt spying on the people of the state of Washington was the solution to reinstilling faith in them, that the process is actually good, and instilling trust in them that it's good. And he just doubled down and said that he needs to know what misinformation and disinformation is out there so that he can combat it. And I said, well, Steve, you could just go talk to folks because people are more than willing to tell you. And it was an interesting take. So I'm running because I believe that I have the skill set to secure our elections, ensure our elections are transparent so that everyday folks can understand it, and bring a little bit of common sense back to the Secretary of State's office and not violate my oath of office like Steve Hobbs is by surveilling the people of Washington.
Oh, well, we definitely need that. Dale, a lot of people don't really know exactly what this office, what the role is and what, your jurisdiction and authority is. Can you tell people a little bit more about that? And what?
Yeah, so there's a whole lot of things. It's kind of where everything gets shoved from the legislature when they don't know where to put things. That's what the Secretary of State's office said. But the big three are election administration, business services, so corporations and charities filings and annual renewal fees for governance and so on. And then libraries and archives. So those are the three big ones. So, we oversee the state library. We oversee elections, obviously, as the chief elections officer, and we are the office that you come to register new businesses if you're starting a new business. So those are the three big ones. We do some other things like the Notary Public Commission, the victim, the address confidentiality program for victims of violent crime, which is very important. So there's a lot that the Secretary of State's office does, but the three big ones are state libraries, elections, and then corporations.
And how does the election administration kind of separate out from your local auditor, who of course is elected from the county level,
Right.
to what the state does? Can you help people understand?
Yeah, so the Secretary of State's office has broader jurisdiction and helps to implement systems, support financially for counties that need it and so on, can give grants. There was a grant for the Albert sensors, which was highly controversial. So there's a lot that the Secretary of State's office can do in support of counties, but there is a degree of local control that counties have. They mail their own ballots and so on. But the big distinction is that the Secretary of State's office takes the laws that the legislature pass that regarding elections, and then they come up with the administrative code to determine how we're going to administer that law. And then we pass that down to the counties, and then the counties have a certain degree of control in how they do it for their county, which every county is different. You know,
Yeah.
King's a lot different to Spokane, for example, in our needs. So there's a degree of local control. But at the end of the day, the Secretary of State is the chief elections officer, and he is the one, or she is the one, that are responsible for certifying the elections at the end of the day. So
Okay.
for me, ensuring that our elections process, county by county and all the way up to the state level, are safe, secure, and transparent is pivotal in ensuring that people trust the process from end to end.
Yeah. And you talked about that trust uh before too, and we're going to get to that. One other question I have is, how big is the agency? How many employees in the state level?
So there's a roughly 500 folks.
Wow.
From
Okay.
what I understand, there's about 500 employees. I've heard varying tallies, 3 to 500. But it depends on there's a lot that obviously you have different folks for different areas in the
Yeah.
Secretary of State's office, right? So it's a big office. It's a big office. There's a lot of folks that you have to manage, and there's a lot of things to manage in terms of policies and procedures for all the different areas. So having a very good team behind me when I'm in the Secretary of State's office, making sure that we're hiring the right folks in the right positions at the right times is going to be pivotal in running a successful office. And just being there as well. I've heard that Steve Hobbs isn't in the office a whole lot. So one of my things is I'm going to make sure that my staff understand that I'm going to be a very hands-on Secretary of State. I'm not going to leave you to just do your job and have this thing on autopilot. We're going to strive for greatness. We're going to make sure that we're hiring the right folks to do the right jobs. But I'm going to make sure that I'm hands on and that we're tackling the tough problems with good solutions from
Yeah.
end to end as well.
Well, and that's critically important. I mean, I think you nailed it, that I don't think people trust what's going on. So there's a lot that needs to, be addressed and be looked at. So talking about Steve Hobbs, why should citizens, Steve Hobbs, right? Am I getting that right?
Yep, Steve Hobbs. Yep.
All of a sudden that sounded funny. Why should citizens vote for you over your other opponents in
Yeah.
this race?
Well, a couple of reasons. Steve Hobbs is a career politician, and I think a lot of us are fed up of career politicians. Secondly, he's an ineffective Secretary of State. I think that he's proven this. One, in the logically AI issue, two, in
Mm.
the 30-day residency issue that I've been raising a lot of awareness on, and violating his oath of office there by removing the 30-day residency requirement. And then three, my background in accounting is going to be pivotal in ensuring that we're running a very streamlined office. Because in accounting, we don't just handle one thing. You know, I've had multiple accounting roles, managerial, tax, and so on. So lending that experience from the private sector to this office is going to be pivotal in cleaning the voter rolls. It's going to be pivotal in hiring and firing and making good executive decisions that, frankly, I don't believe Steve Hobbs has really had that experience. He's been in the legislature, sure, but you've never really run an executive office at that level. I've run businesses, small businesses, and been part of teams that are small, a couple $100,000 a year, all the way up to $40 million a year as a chief financial officer. So I understand what it means to lead a big team and to build cohesion in the office and to build unity, even when there are folks that disagree on diehard issues. I don't see Steve Hobbs. He's not that kind of leader. He can't bring those folks together to say, look, we're here to support the general public. And even in the WAC hearing that I attended, you could see that they didn't want to be there. They were just
Mm.
fulfilling their requirement and doing that. And for me, it's like, hey, you're going to go in that room, and these are the people who pay your paycheck, and you're going to be respectful. And they were respectful, but they also, you could tell they didn't want to be there. And for me, it's like, you're going to show up to work every day, and you're going to be grateful for the opportunity of working for the people of the state, because at the end of the day, we serve the people. And that's been lost on Steve Hobbs by violating the state constitution and by violating our First Amendment rights in surveilling people with logical AI. So I think those are two big core issues, along with my executive experience at a high level that Steve Hobbs frankly doesn't have.
And how long has he been the Secretary of State?
He's been since 2022. So he was appointed by Jay Inslee after Kim Wyman vacated the seat, and then he had a rerun in a special election, and he won that special election against Julie Anderson in 2022.
And remind everybody what happened with Kim Wyman.
So Kim Wyman was our Secretary of State for over a decade. I think it was close to even 16 years, maybe. And she was given a job by the Biden administration. She vacated her position to go work for the Biden administration, and that opened the seat for Steve Hobbs to appoint someone in the interim while they run a special election. So that gave Steve Hobbs the incumbent advantage over any other Republican. And as people know, the 2022 race, there's quite a few Republicans in that race, which ended up splitting the vote. So we got a Democrat and we got an independent in that race. So
Yeah.
very unfortunate timing. And one thing that I'll say on that issue is I am going to honor my oath of office. And for me, that means more than just upholding the Constitution. That means also that I'm not going to take a job just because it pays more or because it's for example, the Trump administration or Biden administration. I'm going to be there through the end of my term. So I'm not going to vacate midterm, whether it's a Republican governor or a Democratic governor. I'm going to see out my term. And if I decide to not rerun, that's a completely different issue. But I'm not going to vacate so that a governor can appoint midterm. I think that bypasses our process. And I think that for us, as conservatives, as Republicans, we should be abiding by rule of law. And for me, I think that the people should be the ones who choose who the Secretary of State is.
I agree
In
with
any
you.
other office. So
Yeah,
I'm going to see out my term when I become Secretary of State.
That's great to hear, and I think you raise a good point. That's an often used tool by agencies, by different elected boards to kind of do that, right? So the person is the incumbent. They run, they get it, then they retire early. Judges, all sorts of offices. You're right, and it does. I've felt the same thing. It bypasses the public's process of that. So I appreciate that you're doing it. And you have two other competitors in the race as well. But
yeah, a Democrat and a guy running as no labels. So
okay.
it's looking very good for me in the primary. We're gearing up. My team and I are gearing up right now and looking at our path to victory for the general election. We have a very good plan together. We believe that this is a very winnable race. We think that the stars are aligning, not just for my race, but a lot of other races right now in Washington State for Republicans, that we can really start taking some seats back and making a difference in our state.
Yeah, and that's what I really love hearing from you, is that you're a we the people person. You're about serving the community, not a career politician. I think a lot of, what we're hearing is people are fed up, and they realize, we cannot keep doing the same things over and expecting different results. It's time. And obviously our state convention showed us, that with the candidates that were elected by our delegates, by our grassroots people. So
Yep.
I would absolutely agree with you. And I think elections are integrally important for both sides, for all sides. Like, Democrats, independents, we all want integral elections. We all want that. So this is not a partisan issue. But should not be a partisan issue.
To me, it's not. And, I think the fact that over 60,000 ballots were returned without the presidential primary, without the Democrat or Republican box checked, and it wasn't just Republicans doing that. I've talked to independents, I've talked to Democrats that are not happy about that. And they're looking at that and they're going, there's an issue here, because in the state constitution, you have the right to privacy of your vote. And people feel that their right to privacy was violated by checking that box, because anyone that's civically engaged, even at a very rudimentary level, knew that everyone had dropped out on the Republican side except Trump. Look, Nikki Haley and DeSantis might have still been on the ballot, but everyone knew they dropped out. So you could take a very good guess that if you were picking up a Republican ballot, that person was voting for Trump, and you'd have been right more than 80% of the time, right?
Yeah.
So no matter what side of the aisle you're on, for me, that's a very important issue that we have to tackle. And I've talked to some county auditors that said it's the most efficient way to do it. I've talked to others that are, understand and share my concerns. But the reality is the 60,000 people's votes were not counted in the presidential primary because they didn't want to prescribe to checking that party box on the outside of the ballot. That is a huge issue. The Democrats like to talk about disenfranchisement. That disenfranchised a huge amount of our electoral base. And for me, that's unacceptable. That has to be fixed. And that's one thing I can fix through the Washington Administrative Code. We can absolutely change where that box will be. And we're going to do that so that those folks who wanted to cast their vote but didn't want to check that box and hand it to the mailman, then we can solve that problem for them.
Yeah, that's awesome. And that brings up a question I was just going to ask you. That is an administrative code issue. That is something
Correct.
your office, it doesn't need legislative action, correct?
Correct. We can implement it through the Washington Administrative Code. Now so there's two parts to this. The first one, in the law, we absolutely do have to make that party declaration, but it doesn't say where.
Right.
That's
right.
where the code comes in. In fact, there was a spokesman review journalist who actually had called the Secretary of State's office and they said, no, that's the law. And I called her and I corrected her. I said, it's not the law. It's an administrative code. I'll send it to you, so on and so on. And I asked her if she was going to correct the article. And she said, well, I'll probably write about this again. It's like, hold on a second. You guys talk about disinformation and misinformation. You didn't even check. You just called the Secretary of State's office and you got someone on the phone to just clarify what you thought to be true instead of actually going and looking. And I was a little disappointed with that because I've had good experience personally with the spokesman review. And I found them to be, they're definitely more left leaning, but they've been, I think lately in the past couple of years, they've been a little bit more objective. So I was a little disappointed in that they wouldn't issue that correction. So to me, that looks to me as though it's gross incompetence from the journalistic standpoint. We're kind of going off topic here, but it's gross incompetence from a journalistic standpoint, and it's misleading people because I'm telling people like, hey, we can fix this. And then they're using their authority to say, oh no, he's wrong. And it's like, no, I was right on that issue.
Yeah, that's important. So that's one of your priorities. What are a couple maybe other of your priorities?
Yeah, so I actually just released 5 of my top priorities a couple of days ago. First is cleaning the voter rolls and implementing new systems to ensure that new voter registrations are valid and they're citizen-only registrations, which is extremely important. The second part to that is implementing the same verification procedures. We'll use the same procedural processes we put in place for voter registrations to clean the voter rolls and ensure that only Washingtonians are voting in our elections using that 30-day residency requirement, and therefore restoring the 30-day residency requirement for the local and statewide elections that was removed unconstitutionally by Steve Hobbs and Bob Ferguson in the consent decree. And that'll safeguard our elections from transient voting too, which is very, very important, because what we don't want to have happen is folks from out of our counties or even out of our city lines or whatever coming into those districts and voting for people because they say, oh, well, I live here now on, the day of the election. They just say, oh, well, I've moved into this district, and that will be a huge problem we're going to have to overcome if we don't restore the 30-day residency requirement. And with that, the ability to prosecute folks who are intentionally being deceitful. And then the fourth on that list is actually protecting children from exposure to inappropriate adult content in our state libraries. I'm going to move all of those books. I'm a First Amendment absolutist. I believe that everyone has the right to free speech. I do not believe in banning books. I don't believe that. What I do believe in, though, is that books have to be on the right shelves in the right places. And any books that have sexual content, and I'm not talking about anatomy and things like that. I'm talking about actual sexual content that are describing sexual acts that have sexual images in them. They need to go into their own section in the libraries with the adult content, and that's where they're going to go. So for me, that's a big one. I think we need to protect our kids and ensure that they're not being able to access that information readily. The internet already makes that easy enough. We don't need that in our libraries, in our public libraries. And then the fifth is to implement a plan to gradually lower business registration costs and completely abolish any revenue generating services such as, things that exist like the annual renewal fee that exists only to generate revenue for the Secretary of State's office. I'm going to abolish that. To me, when as a business owner, when I have to go online and file an annual renewal report that is a no activity report, right? And I say, there's no changes to my organization. And then I have to give $70 to the Secretary of State's office for the privilege of giving them my time to file a no activity report. That's purely in place to generate revenue, the Secretary of State's office, and it is not helping. It's hurting our small businesses. So I want to completely remove any of those fees that are there only to collect revenue. The Department of Licensing, when you go into the DOR, when you go into the, sorry, not the licensing, the DOR, when you go in to file your B&O tax, if you file a no activity report, you don't give them money for filing that report. You just say, oh, it's no activity report. And they're like, okay, done. You're done. You
Right.
only pay if you have the revenue, right? For me, it's the same concept. This is a no activity report. You should not be paying to file a no activity report.
Wow.
So I'm going to work to implement changes to those systems and ensure that we're reducing costs for the small businesses in our state.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I know there's so much regulations that are burdening our businesses as it is, as well
Yep.
as, additional filing fees and stuff. So that's awesome. Those are very powerful priorities. And I think a lot of people, I didn't know before I heard you speak before that the Secretary of State had the oversight of libraries. I mean, that's pretty fascinating. That's such
Yep.
a hot topic. Of course, public libraries, right? This
Correct. This
wouldn't
isn't
be
school. This is
schools.
public.
But
Correct.
still, that's so important, and it's
Correct.
just common sense. Like, we don't want our innocent children having access to stuff that's inappropriate content, right? That, like you said, it's not banning.
We don't want them having access to it, and we don't want our librarians suggesting it to them.
Exactly.
Because to me, if I were to go outside and suggest that kind of book to a random child on the street, I'd be engaging in an illegal activity, and we know where that would end up, and rightfully so. So therefore, I don't believe our librarians should be suggesting that type of content to our teens or our youth either. So
Right.
something I'm very passionate about.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been asking a lot of our other endorsed candidates this question, and I think it's a little different in this office for that you're running for, but I still think it's correlates. So see what you think of this. Given the pervasiveness of money and lobbyists in government, along with the strong presence of special interest groups, how do you intend to effectively navigate and combat these pressures to genuinely represent and stand up for the interests of the citizens of Washington State? We know there's a lot of pressure to go along to get along.
Yeah.
You don't sound like you want to be a career politician, which I appreciate, but there's still going to be a lot of pressures, on
Yeah.
you. So how are you going to navigate that? How do you plan to
Well,
navigate that?
I think you're right. I think you're right at the beginning. There's not really a lot of lobbyist money in this office because there's not really a lot that we do. We're really an administrative office, right? So the legislature passes a law, we implement a whack, and then we go and we do our job. So we're not passing laws. We're not really influential in that regard. But I think the point still remains: how do you ensure that people aren't giving you money and then asking for like a quid pro quo? Really, is what it comes down to. And for me, it's simple. I can't be bought by money. Money doesn't motivate me. I'm someone who had the opportunity at the company that I worked for, actually, and I was making a lot of money. And I could have continued to make a lot of money. And then I found out that they were defrauding our customers. And I gave up, a $200,000 a year position on principle, and went and filed whistleblower complaints. So money isn't it's a tool. It's a means to an end. We absolutely need money for raises. So I will not say that I don't need your money. I do need your money, but it's not going to be the driving factor. If someone comes up to me and says, I'm going to give you money, but I want you to do X, Y, Z, I'm saying, no, absolutely not. You give me money if you believe that I'm the right candidate for the position and that you believe I can win, which I believe I am, and I believe I can win, which is why I funded the first $20,000 of my campaign. So for me, it isn't about money. It's about doing the right thing and applying my skill set too. In fact, short story, I actually did an article. It hasn't come out yet, but I sat down with a journalist from Crosscut on the West Side. And he said, you've never run for public office. I said, no. And he said, well, why are you running for Secretary of State? No one cares about the Secretary of State's office. I said, well, one, I do. And two, because I believe I have a skill set that translates well to this office and I can be effective. And for me, I think that's how we should approach public offices. Do I have a skill set that can be impactful in this office? And can I lead the folks in that office to do a better job? And I believe that I can. So those are the big motivating factors for me.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And I can vouch for your principled, ethic. And just so everybody knows too, you're also a PCO.
Yep.
So, you believe in the grassroots, you're part of it. And I absolutely have confidence you'll carry that out. Any final comments to our voters?
Yeah, listen, one thing we didn't really talk about was the 30-day residency
Oh,
requirement.
yes.
If you want more information on that, you can go to my website. You can go to my X and my Facebook. There's short videos on there too. But in a nutshell, the Secretary of State's office was sued by an organization called Washington State Alliance for Retired Americans. And what they did was they went behind closed doors with the Secretary of State's office and Bob Ferguson and this group called the Washington State Alliance for Retired Americans, and they came to consensus on the lawsuit. And what the lawsuit was an objection essentially to our 30-day residency requirement, because in federal elections, everyone should have the right to vote within the union with all 50 states to ensure that they can vote for president and vice president. The issue is that our 30-day residency requirement, they were stating, would prohibit them from doing that. Well, one, they would still be able to vote in the state that they had just come from, because technically they would still be a resident of that state. But let's just say that they're right, that we absolutely must give that person the ability to vote in a presidential election. The solution would have been to give them a provisional ballot for the federal races. Instead, what we did, or what they did, not we, I would never have done this. What they did is they said, okay, yeah, you guys are right. We're just going to throw out the 30-day residency requirement, which is actually in the state constitution. Article 6, Section 1 states that you have to be a resident for 30 days. So they threw the baby out with the bathwater using a federal judge that is overseeing federal elections, not statewide elections. And essentially what that does is removes any legal remedy that we would have if we know that someone has not been a resident for 30 days, because they changed the language on the voter registration form under certifying under penalty of perjury that you were a resident for 30 days.
Mm.
And the ramifications of that were that you could go to prison for 5 years and have up to a $10,000 fine. So we had a legal remedy. Now what they've said is, well, you just have to certify that you're a resident of Washington State. So the durational requirement has been removed from the forms, even though it's still in the Constitution. So it's going to lead to folks unintentionally violating it, and then those folks who would violate it regardless intentionally. So what we're going to see, perhaps not in these elections, because we'll probably see them be very cautious about how, and judicious about how they start moving votes around. But what you're going to see is you're going to see transient votes coming in from other counties, from other states even, and they're going to start influencing local elections when they have no ties to those communities. Right. So that 30-day residency requirement is pivotal in ensuring that that person is at least been here for 30 days and that they have some ties to our community, and they're not just voting for people down ballot for voting's sake, right? We want people voting in our elections locally that have ties to our community, that care about our community. And we might disagree on issues, but we at least want them to be tied here so that they're exercising their vote judiciously. And that's not going to happen now. And this isn't only going to impact local elections either. What we should all be concerned about is the impact this is going to have on initiatives. Because every time these people get ballots that move here within that 30-day window, they're going to be able to vote on those initiatives. And they're not going to have had enough time to really research those issues.
Mm.
Let's say you move here on election day, you can register to vote up until 8 p.m. on election day here in the state of Washington. If you walk in at 7:45 and they hand you a ballot, how are you meant to know what I-2066 is about? Right? So there's a huge problem that's going to impact not just our local races, our statewide races, and the initiative process, which has been very good for the people of the state of Washington. So one of the first things I'm going to do when I become Secretary of State is I'm going to reinstate that by implementing new WAC, and then we'll go back to that judge and we will contest that ruling. So that's a big thing for folks to look out for and just read into a little bit. I've been very vocal about this issue. And other than that, the other thing that I'll leave you guys with, because the question was, is there anything else that people need to know? I absolutely appreciate the time here. And I also appreciate the voters and the constituents of Washington State from all sides of the aisle This race is very, very important. A lot of folks don't understand what we do. So if you've gotten to the end of this video, I please just ask you to go out and look at the things Secretary Hobbs is doing, look at my positions, and I will go and fight for every single Washingtonian, regardless of what side of the aisle you're on, how you vote. Your vote is important. Your voice is important, and you exercising your civic duty is the most fundamental thing you can do. And I applaud everyone for doing that. So I will represent everyone from across the aisle. And I hope to secure your vote in not just in August, but in November as well. And if you need more information, you can visit whitakerforwa.com. So it's my last name, Whitaker, FORWA.com. And you can get all the information you need there.
And they can also follow you. You mentioned this before on X. You're on X, and are you
Correct.
mostly on X or both?
Mostly on X. Facebook is a little tougher. As you know, when you hold conservative positions, Facebook don't like that as much. So X is very good in getting the word out. But I do post almost everything that I post on X. I try to post on Facebook too, but X is a lot more engaging.
Okay.
So if you follow me on X, it's Dale Whitaker Wa. So it's just my first and last name and then Wa at the end. And you can see all my positions there as well.
Yeah, and you can also follow us on Spokane GOP. We like to retweet what Dale's doing. You can keep up. I think this 30-day residency issue is a really big deal, and people are trying to understand that. I just want to clarify something. So basically, somebody could come here and so they'd still have to give proof of residence?
Nope. So you can walk in with any ID, as long as it's a government ID. So it could be, let's just say Utah. You can walk in with a Utah ID. You could say, here's my ID. I live at this address. Provide them with an address, and they will register you to vote and hand you a ballot.
That is just ripe for all sorts of shenanigans. So
It is.
basically, like, we live right 30 minutes away from Idaho. So if, a bunch of people came over from Idaho and wanted to influence our elections, what if a bunch of Republicans wanted to come over, right? I mean, or
there's
Democrats, or yeah.
There's nothing stopping anyone. And that is, to me, that is a huge issue. It's a huge issue for the Democrats. It's a huge issue for independents. It's a huge issue for Republicans.
Absolutely.
This is not safeguarding our elections at all.
Oh, that's horrific. Well, go find Dale on X and go to his website. Go to our website, SpokaneGOP.com. We have all of our endorsed candidates there, including Dale on there, and we have a link to his website. Support him, help him get across it. We need Dale Whitaker as our Secretary of State. You've heard the passion from this man. Obviously, he's very versed in all of this. He knows what needs to happen in our state to help secure elections. And get out there and vote. And even though Dale's feeling pretty good about getting through the primary, we want to ensure that he gets through the primary so we get to vote for him in the general election. So get out there. Ballots drop next week. We need everybody to vote. It's critical, especially there's so many other races that are really, we've got a lot of candidates. And so this is your chance to really make sure. Dale, thanks for your time today. Thanks for coming and sharing your heart with our voters. And we'll be watching and supporting you as much as we can. And I'm sure we'll talk to you again.
Yep. Thanks. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Dale.